This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it, and that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Pete Hunt on the show, and he is the CEO of Elementl. He was the head of engineering, kind of made that shift over, and he's got a long history in tech when it comes to software development and especially front-end technologies, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, as the conversation goes on. But anyway, Pete, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
And if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and kind of how you how your tech career has evolved and what is it that you guys are doing today.
Yeah, so I am currently the CEO at Elementl. We make an open source data orchestrator called Dagster and a commercial product that sits on top of that. But I've been in tech for a long time. And I've been in open source and dev tools for a long time too. I started my career back at Facebook during this kind of magical era. It was 2010 to 2014 was when I was there. And we had a lot of open source hits. So I was a member of the original React.js team, which became a pretty successful open source project. The founder and CTO of Elementl, former CEO Nick Schrock, he was co-creator of GraphQL around that time. And there were other technologies like in the front end space, but as well as like DataSwarm, for example, which was the precursor to Airflow, was also kind of created at Facebook around that time. So very, very exciting time to start your career. The iPhone had launched recently. Mobile was starting to be a big thing. So it was a lot of fun to start your career out there. Then after a couple of years, I became co-founder and CEO of a company called Smite, which basically took Facebook's trust and safety infrastructure and democratized it. So offered it up as a service that smaller companies could pay for. And we ended up selling that to our second largest customer, which was Twitter, back in 2018. So I spent a couple of years at Twitter before coming over to Elementl last year.
Awesome. And what was it, why did you make the decision to leave Twitter and come over to Elementl?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the first question I get is like, did Elon have anything to do with it? And the answer is no. I made the decision to leave in January of 2022, which was before any of that got started. Listen, I had sold my company to Twitter. I had run a fairly substantial org there, within the health and trust and safety category. And, there are a number of reasons why I wanted to leave. First of all, I spent, over 3.5 years there. Felt like I had really, learned a lot and had an impact. And, frankly, was just kind of poking my head up a little bit, taking a look at what the next thing was going to be for me, making a decision whether to stay or to find something else. And then, I had been friends with Nick Schrock, who founded Elementl for years, way back starting at Facebook. And, he was looking for a head of engineering. I was helping him out with that search. And eventually I realized, hey, this is actually like a really exciting and unique opportunity for me. So I ended up deciding to take the role with Elementl. It was a great decision. I think that, Twitter was also a great place to work, but, within trust and safety, especially at a place like Twitter, it can be it's a very challenging role, and can be, it's subject to a lot of like non-engineering constraints, which is fun and exciting for a while. And then you kind of are like, okay, maybe it's time for the next thing.
Yeah. So tell me about the relationship between Dagster and Elementl and kind of, what came first?
Yeah. So Dagster came first. The origin story here is that Nick Schrock had a similar experience at Facebook. He stayed at Facebook longer than I did, but he felt like he did everything there was to do over there, and then was taking a look at what the next thing was going to be. He wanted to do something really impactful. Facebook was impactful in one way, like Facebook and Instagram and the WhatsApp, that suite of products changed the ways that people connect. but you wouldn't exactly look at their suite of products and say, hey, this is like solving the biggest societal problems we have, right? Like it's not curing cancer. It's not, securing reliable energy or anything like that. So he really wanted to do something like that, really impactful, deep societal problem. And he started asking around, and what he learned was that managing data was the biggest problem that a lot of these organizations were having. These organizations being energy companies, biotech, pharma, financial services, these really important organizations, they were having trouble, managing their data, making sure that it was up to date, making sure the quality checks were passing, knowing where it all was. And so he started the Dagster open source project to kind of solve those problems. Basically, ended up evolving into a data orchestrator, and then started a company around that. So the company started pretty soon after the open source project was founded, but primarily, Dagster is our only product. We have Dagster open source, and then we have Dagster cloud. So we are basically the Dagster company.
So, when you mentioned these, larger companies that, like energy companies or something like that, that has this, enormous amount of data, and, they have challenges. I know even I work in a smaller company, and we even have challenges with data when it comes to, where we're going to get it from and all the different vendors. I mean, we're when we're dealing with media, you could have different, metrics that you want to kind of, how do you connect them all together? And how do people use Dagster to kind of, fix that?
Yeah. So we are in the category of data orchestration, and we're trying to evolve that category, right? So if you think about, let's first set the table a little bit, right? What is data engineering? Data engineers, they are basically taking data from one place, combining it together, transforming it, and then storing an output data asset somewhere. So the output of this process is a dashboard, a report, a machine learning model, maybe a data mart, like a set of tables in a data warehouse for other people to use. But these are, examples would be, a model that predicts, buying intent for a user, or maybe you're reporting the core metrics that you read on the earnings call to Wall Street, right? So these things have to be correct. It's really, really important that these are correct. And so the way that they deliver these data assets are through these things called data pipelines, and pipelines have different steps in them. And so what an orchestrator historically has done is it's chunked up those pipelines into separate steps. It's run them in the correct order on the right schedule. And it has also made sure that they are rerun or restarted if they fail. And then an alert is raised if, the step can't complete for whatever reason. So that's been kind of the state of the art for orchestration. There are a lot of tools that have done this in the past. Apache Airflow is like the most famous one. And when Nick took a look at the problem a couple of years ago, I thought this was a pretty interesting insight. All of these orchestrators are centered around the notion of a task. So you break your pipeline into a set of tasks, and that the tasks execute one after another. And the orchestrator doesn't really know what the task does. So it could write to some, S3 data store or Snowflake table or not. They're basically black boxes. And when they're black boxes, they become very difficult to develop locally, very difficult to test, and very difficult to observe too. All the orchestrator knows is that the step failed, but doesn't really know why, doesn't really know how to recover. And it becomes really hard to schedule these things. So if you have to add, a new data asset, you want to produce a new report based on some other data in your organization, you have to figure out, okay, which pipeline should I jam this thing into? Which schedule should I pick? And Nick just thought this was kind of like caveman stuff. It was kind of similar to how front end was pre-React, where it was very imperative. It wasn't a real software engineering discipline. Like these tools, you used Python, but not in really idiomatic software engineering ways. And so started Dagster to fix that. There were a couple things that we did. The first is our core abstraction is the asset. And so you code in this like declarative style where you just say, hey, here are the assets that are part of my pipeline. But then you attach SLAs to those assets. So, here's how fresh I want it to be. And then you let the system figure out how to assemble those into a pipeline, how to run them on the right schedule, how to restart them, when they fail. And you get this great notion of like, very declarative programming model that fits your brain and actually can save you a lot of money because you're not running things more often than you need to. So yeah, it ended up being great.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I imagine all the different things that are out there. When do you see or when did you see that kind of Daxter really start to take hold in the community and people to respond to this project that Nick was kind of putting together?
Yeah, there were a couple of moments, right? And one of the reasons why I joined and frankly left some stock on the table at Twitter was because I felt like I wanted that next like React experience. Like that was really, really fun and exciting, and I wanted to find the next thing. And so I was kind of looking around at different open source projects and companies and figuring out who had that potential. And so there were a couple of moments with Daxter. So first of all, when they announced at Data Council a couple of years ago, that's a big data conference, there was a lot of really positive reception to the core thesis and the core ideas. And then I joined, as there were a bunch of open source users at this point. It wasn't a runaway success. But when I joined, we launched our 1.0 product, we launched our cloud product to general availability, and we had an inflection point, I would say, in August when we did those launches. And we had a second inflection point in January, where I think a lot of the marketing stuff that I had put in place as CEO really started to land and show up in the metrics.
Yeah. So let's talk about your change, because you said you came over as head of engineering and then, somehow you became CEO. What was that transition like? And, what was the conversations that you had with Nick in order for this to take place? How did that go?
Oh, man. It's so funny. So I am a former CEO. I had this company, like I said, between Facebook and Twitter that we sold to Twitter. Acquisition was like super stressful. Any major event in the company's lifestyle is super stressful, or lifetime is super stressful. As CEO, there's a lot of work, and at the end of that process, I was like, I am never being a CEO again. That was way too much work. And then, you spend a couple of years at a bigger company, and you start to get the itch again. So when I poked my head up in end of 2021, early 2022, to figure out what was next for me, I was looking for either a CEO gig or some sort of senior engineering leader position at a startup.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had an option to go be a CEO of a Series B startup, but Elementl, I just really like the people and the technology at Elementl better. So I took the head of eng role. I think I'm very much an entrepreneur at heart, but I just didn't have any good ideas. Yeah. And it's really important that you have like a decent idea and a decent market. And I didn't have any inspiration at that point. So I was like, all right, I'll go work for somebody else for a while and figure out how this goes. And so we had a really, really great 2022. We had all those launches that I mentioned. And I was actually hired as kind of like a VP++. That's what was pitched to me. So I ended up actually owning a lot of marketing, for example. And I had a lot of opinions about how sales should be done and how we should package the product. Like, these are things that I had drawn on from my previous CEO experience. And Nick and I had a really great collaborative vibe going on. He was a solo founder. I think he was really happy to have somebody else who had done it before, join the team. And so when we were getting, closer to the end of the year, Nick pulls me aside. He says, hey, listen, Pete, I'm a solo founder. I am an engineer at heart. I really love the product and I love working with customers. And it's really hard to do that or to really give that the time and attention it deserves, and also build a venture scale company, because there's all sorts of other stuff you have to do. Like you got to recruit, you got to raise money, you got to drive a go-to-market process. And so I ended up stepping into the CEO role. Nick stepped into the CTO role. So I take on mostly the operational stuff at this point. And Nick takes on kind of the more technical and product stuff, which is funny because, at any other company, I would be the more kind of technical and product CEO, but, there's two of us, and I think it's a really great division of responsibility because I learned a lot, the first time around. So I get to make a whole new set of mistakes this time.
So which do you like better? I know for me, I have been, I had a startup for about 7 years, and then moved out of that back into tech, and for me, I don't want the stress of being the CEO, and maybe I fall more into Camp Nick, when it comes to that. But what do you like better?
I like being CEO.
Yeah.
Actually, I've been an engineering leader for a long time, and it can be really fulfilling. It can be really unfulfilling. So, like at
Yeah.
Elementl, it was pretty fulfilling, and at various points at bigger companies like Twitter, Facebook, it would kind of swing between really fulfilling and like really like almost a bummer, right? Like if you have a
Mhm.
really challenging performance management situation and the line manager can't handle it, now you're kind of managing this really uncomfortable process through somebody else. That sucks. That's not fun. And just generally, I think when organizations hit a certain size, it becomes they can end up in a structure where it's difficult for anybody to make decisions, and it's difficult to actually kind of move your metrics directly. So in those situations, I like to go to like at least be an engineering leader at a smaller company. But being CEO, it's great because you just got like really broad scope, and everything is your fault. So if something is broken, you can fix it, which I think is really empowering and fun.
Yeah, I think that part of it is cool. I know for me, it's just more like the stress. You said everything's your fault. Yes, and everyone is, looking up to you, and you're kind of responsible for everyone, in the org, which is, a big weight to bear, and yeah.
Well,
And I was going to also say, you mentioned the peak, kind of like peaks and valleys when it comes to being an engineer leader, and you're right. You definitely have those times where you have a new solution that you were able to like React, something new that you were able to put out there, kind of feel that like, this is starting to catch on. People are starting to grab a hold of this. This is making an impact, and then you also have like, something, this release did not go very well, and we've got to backpedal it. We got to figure this out, or something like that as well.
yeah, definitely. It's definitely a journey, but what I will say is second time around being CEO,
Mhm.
at least at this point for me, it's a lot easier, or rather a lot less stressful because, you kind of gone through it before, what's a big deal, what's not a big deal, and you can kind of turn it on and off depending on when you need to. So I think the second time around is a lot better.
Yeah.
I see you.
So when it comes to going through some of the duties as a CEO, that I think a lot of maybe engineering leaders at a medium-sized company that don't have to, that are kind of shielded from a lot of this. What are some of the things that you have to do when it comes to like raising capital and things like that that may not be aware of someone that is an engineering leader that may be interested someday in switching over and having their own startup or working with someone in that role?
The biggest, I mean, there's a bunch of things that are different. Uh, I'll start with the advice, and then I can talk about kind of my journey. But the advice that I would have to engineering leaders that want to switch into being a CEO is number one, just do it. But that one's pretty obvious. There's not much more to say about that. But the second one is if you're in a large organization, uh, try to get opportunities to really work cross functionally. And so if you've got opportunity to support a marketing project or opportunity to like dig in with your sales engineering team, like go take that opportunity, because what you'll find is that the way, like sales is a great example where the approach to collaboration is entirely different. The approach to compensation is entirely different. The way that they're managed and the career paths of account executives is like way different than engineering. And I
Yeah.
think my first time around, I was like, I was way out of my element. I didn't know anything about that stuff. And so I think learning that and trying to get a sense of the lingo across the major functions in a business. So, sales, marketing, operations, finance, recruiting, like understanding how those functions work at a high level is a good thing.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I know one of the things that's really benefited me is having those cross-functional meetings. Like when I came into the role that I'm at now, heading our tech group, it was, I made it a point to have, regular meetings with the other leaders of other departments, whether it be HR, finance, our broadcast group, or marketing and sales, and just to, and they were shocked. They're like, well, why do we need to meet with, technology? We don't have any projects right now for you guys to, work on, and we haven't submitted any requests. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I want to know how your business works. How can we maybe, capitalize on things that we're already doing for you? and learning some of those things that are out there. They help you give a broader understanding of all of operations and all the things that are working out there. For me, it was a shock of legal, like a lot of the things that legal teams are doing. And when I think about how we do things in tech, I'm like, God, why do you do it that way?
Right. And I mean, it helps that, those stakeholders don't look at you as just ticket takers, and you don't look at them as just grouchy stakeholders, right? You can actually start to like get ahead of stuff and identify, things you can do proactively to make sure that everybody's happy and that you guys are not overstressed with what it is that you.
Absolutely. Another thing that I realized from doing way back when I was managing a web and mobile development team at a different company many years ago. Actually, I was doing that back in 2010 when the iPhone came out. We built the first apps over there. But one of the things that I realized, I was trying to become a better leader, and I was reading a book. I think it was Simon Sinek's Start with Why book, coming up with what's the why behind this. And we used to see things just as a ticket. It's just a request. We didn't care about the why behind that. But then as I got to know the departments, I started realizing like why this is such a big deal. And having these meetings and understanding, the why behind requests that come in, helps motivate my team a whole lot more, because I can come to them not just with a request, but with a story. And I think that's really important.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really, I think the most effective teams that I've seen are ones where the individual, where you see that kind of individual senior software engineer or whoever, they just go off and they do the right thing, and nobody told them to do it, and they just proactively identified that. And that shows that you've really driven the kind of cultural and strategic alignment, like all the way up and down the chain. And it's, I always love it too, when kind of people that are on the hook for implementing a feature, whether it's like a designer, an engineer, they push back, they say, hey, this doesn't make any sense, and here's why. And you're like, oh, you know what? You're right. That doesn't make any sense. That went through the whole meat grinder of the road mapping machine and popped out the other end, and we got a ticket that didn't make any sense. And that's always great too, right? Like if you can have those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it when you have this request for something, and you guys went through, you vetted it, you decided that the best thing to do was to purchase this really expensive software. We're going to purchase this from a third party. We're not going to build it. We're not going to implement it. Someone says, we already have this that does all like 90% of it. We can just finish it right here. Like, oh yeah, I didn't even think of that. I love that. I love that when that happens. So being a CEO, I imagine that, your direct reports are now very different than what your direct reports were as, head of engineering. How is the leadership, the communication that you have to have with those direct reports different now than maybe they were earlier? Like, are one-on-ones different? Are they the same? Or what's that, process like?
One-on-ones are generally pretty similar, I think. You have the running notes doc. You meet for half hour to an hour every week or every other week, depending on who it is and what's going on. I tend to prefer shorter meetings weekly, but I think where the big difference is the level of strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of, when you're talking to an exec that kind of reports to me, I say, listen, here is our problem. Our MQL to opportunity conversion rate is too low. Like, go forth and solve it. I don't know how to solve it. You should go figure out how to solve it. And I think that there are versions of that happen in engineering, but I think that, number one, there's a lot of like, we know what to do, let's just go do it, that happens in engineering. And then number two, a lot of the problems that they don't have clearly articulated solutions, those often bubble up from engineering itself. They say, hey, we've got this scalability issue, or we've got this, data compliance issue. And a lot of times that it kind of stays within engineering, and like the board doesn't really care. Whereas a lot of times when you're kind of passing down guidance to your direct reports as CEO, everything's like a board level issue usually. So, or a lot of it is. So
let's talk about that a little bit, because I've served on a board before, and I think a lot of people that are, and I didn't realize this until I actually did that, because I was kind of ignorant about the whole process. But a lot of people think that once you become the CEO, you're the ultimate boss, and you don't have to answer to anybody except for customers. But what's the reality of that like?
The reality of it is, like, actually, this is a really good example of transitioning from eng leader to CEO. Like multi-party negotiation is the norm. So you've got a bunch of different stakeholders around the table. You've got like employees, you've got the management team, which is sort of like employees, but sort of not. And then you have the board members, and then you have the other investors. And everybody is around the table, and you're trying to figure out, how to balance all of these competing interests. So maybe just for listeners that haven't served on a board or don't really know what happens at the board. So there's a quarterly board meeting, and the key business metrics are presented. And so basically all of my direct reports as CEO, they own one or more of these core business metrics. And so that's what I mean when I say it, every problem that I bring to them is usually a board level problem because it impacts those top line metrics. And so we present on those, and then you promptly get grilled on like, hey, why didn't we hit our sales target? Or, hey, this number, a challenging one was like, hey, this number went up. Like, that's great. Why did it go up? And sometimes you don't know. And so being able to say, I don't know, in a way that still inspires confidence, I think is an important skill to develop. So, and then, what you have to keep in mind is that, the board makes the final decisions on a lot of things. They tend to delegate a lot of responsibility to the management team. So they delegate, almost every decision to the CEO normally, and then the CEO then delegates that to their direct reports, and then it recursively goes down, right? Like, so everybody's got a little bit of area of ownership, but they can take that away if they feel like the CEO is not doing a good job. And you've seen that happen. I mean, that famously happened at Uber, but at other places as well. So there's a certain amount of stakeholder management, I think, and the way that I have managed boards, and I wouldn't say that I'm not the most seasoned CEO in the entire world, right? I've been CEO at two places, but
right.
Erring on the side of transparency and being really proactive in your communication of good and bad news, and being pretty conservative in your estimates and forecasts, I think serves you really well. So, it forces conversations early that are really helpful. And then board members are actually like, they've got this, they sit on boards of dozens of companies often, right? So they can see these patterns and like kind of pull in experts that you need to help you, solve whatever problem you have. So that you can really use boards in a way to make your company a lot better.
So do you think one of the, I guess, traps that new CEOs may fall into is not being as transparent with their board, or maybe try to, sugarcoat things and make it look better than it really is?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think like better than it really is. Like, there's one interpretation of that, which is like, it implies fraud, which
right.
I don't think, at least I don't hear about too much
right.
fraud that happens, but there are metrics that you could emphasize or de-emphasize, and stories you could tell, ways you can frame things up. And one of the dynamics I think that a lot of people don't appreciate is that the board invested at the last round, and like, they are going to be investors in the next round if they like the business. And so there's there's this weird vibe sometimes where it's like, hey, we're all invested in this company. We're all running it together. But you also, are a little cognizant of the fact that they might invest in the future. And so at my first time around, I was very worried about that. This time around, I don't care at all. So I'm very much like, hey, we're all in this together. I'm like, not going to try to pre-negotiate the next round of funding or try to paint a rosier picture of the business that actually exists. Like, I'm just gonna treat it like we're a team here. And my last company, I would say the big difference is, if I had a problem and I was worried about it, I would try really, really hard to solve it before like surfacing it. This time around, I give kind of a heads up. I say, hey, I got this problem. Here's what I'm doing to work on it. If you have any feedback about what I'm doing, please let me know. And that's I think led to a lot of really positive conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I bet it has. So what's next for Dagster or Elementl, and that maybe our listeners need to be aware of?
Yeah, so let's see. We launched our product to general availability and went to 1.0 last year. By the end of Q1 this year, I think it's become pretty well established at this point that we are the Airflow is the most dominant open source solution. It's been around for like over a decade. I think it's pretty pretty clear at this point that we are like the fastest growing alternative, and the one that is, if you're not going to pick Airflow, like really the next choice should be Dagster, or the next place you should look should be Dagster. A lot of people do pick Airflow for the, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM situation.
Yeah.
It's dominant. Everybody knows about it. Just pick the dominant thing. Like there are plenty of great companies that do make that decision. But I think for those that are kind of a little more open to an alternative and seeing the benefits, because, again, Airflow, like developers really don't like it because it doesn't support modern software engineering best practices, whereas Dagster was built from the ground up to support things like local development testing, CI/CD, first-class declarative abstraction, those kind of things. That's where those companies see huge productivity benefits. And so we're still, evangelizing that. But with respect to kind of like the future here, I mean, eventually we want to be the dominant solution on top of Airflow. We're on the path to do that, but it's going to take some time. I published a blog post called the Dagster Master Plan, where we basically took our internal roadmap, cleaned it up, and then published it as a blog post. And so, we're really focused on some features around, improving our declarative scheduling capabilities. And we've got some really exciting cost management features coming down the pipe to help people manage their spend on data warehouses, which is a big problem that we're hearing from customers today.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I think that's a really good place to start. I know for me, whenever I want to transition something from a well-known product to maybe something that's not as well-known but sounds a whole lot better and maybe a lot more interesting, if you can find me a way to save some money, cut some costs somewhere down the line, that's going to really help make that argument. Yeah.
And the way we like to frame it is, the last decade or so was about big data, and then we kind of solved big data, and that has created this explosion in complexity above us in the stack that we just call big complexity, where all these companies have bought tons of different SaaS products. They have all these different open source tools, combination of on-prem and cloud. And what we're trying to help people do is like tame that chaos, like put a control plane over that whole thing. And then, over time, reduce the number of individual tools that they need and start to consolidate.
I think that's a really good approach. So how can people learn more about the things that you guys are doing over at Elementl and maybe connect with you online, Pete?
Yeah. So I'm on Twitter. Just search for Pete Hunt, I'll come up. And then the Dagster website is dagster.io. And then we have a community page as well, which is dagster.io/community. That's where you can kind of connect with the project, see what we're all about. And then the community page, you can drop into our very, very active, sometimes too active Slack community and other channels like that.
All right, awesome. And I'll link that up in the show notes too at geekleader.com so people can, link over and find out more there. Pete, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to. Click on their links and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.